humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 362, and I had a conversation with Dr. Tristin Engels. Dr. Engels is a clinical forensic psychologist. She's in outside practice, but also works within the California prison system to ensure the welfare of inmates and patients. She's been featured on documentaries like The Garden State Killer and Evil Among Us, Ted Bundy, and has extensive experience with psychopaths and violent criminals. Her book, The Power of Truth, The Life of Louis R. Vitullo, and The Legacy of the Rape Kit, is about her grandfather, the creator of the Vitullo Evidence Collection Kit, otherwise known as the Rape Kit, which standardized the collection of evidence in sexual assault cases. Now, we talk about this in this episode, but I want to bring it up again. I think it's so important. You can go to endthebacklog.org in order to help give money to help process the huge backlog of rape kits that there are waiting to be processed to match with DNA. So it's endthebacklog.org. Super important. There's trigger warnings for sure because we do talk about pretty intense things. So just make sure that you understand that going in. Trigger warning for certain for conversations about rape and violence. Check out HeyHumanPodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests in the show. Check out SusanRuth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get your music. Look for my most recent album, All I Ever Wanted Was Everything. Also, check out my relationships and sex show with sexologist and healthcare practitioner Mara Edelman on YouTube under Are We There Yet Podcast Show. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for listening, and thank you for spreading the word. It's super helpful. Thank you for reviewing the show. All of it helps. I really appreciate it. Take care. Be well. Be love. Lift each other up. And let's get into this. Here we go. Dr. Tristin Engels, welcome to Hey Human.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, I learned of you through my work with the Green Wall story.
Yeah.
So, but when you and I were talking about that, the whole time I was thinking to myself, dang, she's the most fascinating human being. I've got to get her on Hey Human. So I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here, but that's quite a compliment. I feel pressure now to live up to this.
No pressure. Let's jump in. Tell me where you're from, where you grew up.
I'm from just outside of Chicago, kind of all over. I lived in the northwest suburbs for most of my life. I went to high school in Mount Prospect, Illinois, or I lived there and I went to high school there. And I lived in Chicago City for about 10 years before moving to California. So yeah, Midwest girl here.
What brought you to California?
Grad school. Yeah, I came to California for grad school. I got into a graduate program in Chicago, but they had a campus out here I could transfer to, and I wanted to transfer here and do my internships and practicum out here. And I got some really good experience doing that. So
Chicago weather, LA weather.
Yeah, it was supposed to be temporary. I was supposed to be out here for the valuable learning experiences and return home, but that just never happened.
What did you study in college?
Undergrad college is psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went to the University of Illinois, Chicago. Graduate school, I studied clinical forensic psychology.
I think forensics in general is fascinating. Can you talk about the difference between general forensics and then forensic psychology, what that means?
Yeah. So general forensics, I think when people hear forensic, a lot of times they're thinking, oh, are you going to crime scenes? Are you doing investigative work like that? That is what people think of when they hear the term forensic, forensic science, going to doing crime scene investigation, doing DNA analysis, solving crimes. That is not what I do. I'm a clinical forensic psychologist. So my role is doing, working with forensic populations in the criminal justice system in the role of a psychologist. So I don't solve crimes. I'm not trying to find, active serial killers or anything like that. I meet with individuals in the criminal justice system after they've been caught. That's the main difference. I'm not in crime scenes. I do see crime scene footage, especially in certain evaluations I've been court ordered to conduct on a defendant. Some of them, they give me all of the records, including, body cam footage and crime scene evidence and things like that. But I don't go to the actual scene. I come in way after the fact. So those are the main differences.
What brought you into that career?
So growing up, I outside of Chicago, my grandfather was a Chicago police sergeant. He went on to become the chief of the crime lab, the chief microanalyst of the Chicago crime lab. He was a forensic science individual. So he has all kinds of education in the field of forensic science and DNA analysis and all of that. So he ran the crime lab and he worked on some very notorious cases like Richard Speck. I don't know if you remember him, but he killed about 8 nurses in 1963, I believe it was. I could be wrong there. And my grandfather was in Time magazine for that case because it was such a unnerving case. It rocked the city entirely. And he was the point person in helping to identify Richard Speck. So that he got called out of retirement for working on John Wayne Gacy because that crime scene was extremely complex, as you can imagine. But more importantly, he worked with a sexual assault survivor by the name of Martha Goddard to create the rape kit, which we know now as the rape kit, which is used all over the world now and continues to help bring justice to survivors when they're tested. That's a whole other issue. But also helps exonerate wrongfully convicted individuals. So I was very close to him. He was my inspiration. He was a hero of mine, best buds. We were inseparable growing up. And when he passed away, I had just graduated undergraduate college and trying to figure out what to do with my life. We all are in our early 20s. So he had passed right after that. And when he passed, we were inundated with cards and letters and phone calls and newspaper articles. The mayor was dedicating a day to him. The Chicago Police Department dedicated a day to him. And I read every single card, every single letter. And all of them were from survivors or attorneys or anybody who has worked with my grandfather or was impacted by him and his contribution. And it was so moving. And it really made me think, okay, I need to carry on this legacy and do something with this. It was just that inspiring. So I thought about forensic science, but I am not, I'm not cut out for that. I'm not cut out for law enforcement. So I thought, what can I do? And I remember my grandfather telling me, I called him Papa. He was Italian. So I remember him telling me that the one thing he couldn't understand was that no matter what he did in his career to help deter offending or reoffending, he would see the same crimes being committed and the same people cycle through the system. And he didn't understand what could be done to stop that. So essentially what he was telling me was he didn't understand recidivism and why it was occurring. And it wasn't something that was highly focused on during his, tenure in law enforcement. And so that led me into the path of forensic psychology. And that's where I am today. So
is that what a bulk of your work is then, to try and either stop recidivism or see why it's happening?
A lot of it, yeah. I worked for a number of years for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and I really enjoyed that work, mostly for the efforts to help with recidivism. So when I was working for the department, I really focused on rehabilitation efforts. I focused on gang and drug prevention. I focused on drug and alcohol education. I did a lot of interventions there and a lot of education there with the incarcerated adults that were on my caseload, and tried to help them learn and gain tools and build a toolbox. So when they were eventually released, they were that much more successful and they understood, what led them there. So I started working with that. And then now I do therapy with people who are in the community still, but have a history of being incarcerated. So it's about, supporting them while in the community. And I work with the courts, and I do court-ordered evaluations for individuals with mental illness. So if they're being charged with a crime, they'll call me in to double check, okay, are they competent? Were they insane at the time of the offense? Can we do a diversion program for them? Meaning, like, we send them to a mental health diversion instead of prison, get them treatment. I get to help in that way. And that does also impact recidivism rates in a large capacity. So yeah.
So you helped to answer your grandfather's ponder.
Yes, exactly. The one lingering question that he had, I thought to answer. And I'm still seeking to do that. Not every person I encounter is going to be successful, but success in this business is small victories, and I'll take them where I get them. And it's very inspiring and gratifying when it does happen. So
what do you see as being one of the contributing, or at least a bulk of the contributing factors to people that do reoffend? And as a second part of that question, do you think that the system is in fact set up to failure for those that are incarcerated?
Those are some pretty intense questions. Mm-hmm. So starting with the one, I think largely there's a lot of flaws in our criminal justice system. There's very limited resources that underserved populations can have access to. And even those resources that we have, created are so underfunded or overcrowded, so to speak, where there's wait lists and there's not enough supply for the demand. The biggest factors for recidivism that I've seen is lack of basic needs getting met, lack of education, lack of access to care that middle class and upper class individuals will have. If somebody's basic needs can't be met, that's the biggest factor for recidivism. I mean, that's when they resort to stealing and doing what they have to do to survive. Lack of treatment for untreated mental illness, or lack of treatment for ongoing substance dependence. Those are some very significant elevations and risks of reoffending. Those are the things that we see quite frequently when it comes to recidivism. Now, the justice system, is it set up for success? In some ways, yes. I think there are aspects where it is successful. There are a lot of aspects about the system that work against rehabilitation. Having worked in corrections, one of those things that I really see is that it's all about punishment. So they're already removed from society. They're already serving their time. And while they're in there, they do get access to vocation, education. They do have those things, but those things are also very limited. There's a wait list, and sometimes their term is shorter than the time it takes for them to wait to get into those programs. So they'll be there the entire time without access to any of those programs before they're released without any support when they're let go. But again, it's all about punishment. So there's very little reinforcement for pro-social behavior that occurs in an institution. That was something that was really frustrating as somebody who studies this and understands the human behavior. When an incarcerated individual is trying to do the right thing in prison, trying to self-advocate, trying to get a job, trying to, and because they do get jobs in prison, trying to do things that will help them set them up for success. If they go about it the pro-social way, requesting it, applying, waiting, and they still are getting nowhere, they're not reinforcing those efforts. When they get frustrated, then they get punished. So it's more of like, we need to start reinforcing the pro-social behavior, supporting them when they're going about it the right way, instead of pushing them until they have no other choice but to, raise their voice or act out or do whatever it is to get their needs met, to be heard. Then we end up punishing them. So there's a lot of flaws in the system that it needs a whole overhaul, really. at least in our country. Other countries have done it pretty well. So
yeah, some of the countries, Denmark comes to mind, really knows what it's doing.
Portugal, they treat people with substance abuse as human beings in need of treatment. They don't throw them in prison. They get them treatment. We don't do that. We throw people in prison, and then we don't treat their substance abuse in prison. And
it's not only that, but it's facilitated by drugs and alcohol that come into the facilities.
Exactly. That's a whole other aspect. The green wall aspect, all of that also needs an overhaul. There needs to be more like oversight. And personally, I think that they should have an undercover agent in every department in each institution to monitor for those things, because it's that rampant.
Can you imagine that job though? Good Lord.
Yeah. It would be a tough one. I know that they have like special agents that will go undercover at times as custody officers, but they need somebody who will go undercover as just, an administrative person or a mental health person or, something like that, because the special agents are just promoted officers from within. They've been with the department, they've come up the ranks, so they know a lot of the people they'd investigate anyway. So they need like a whole other agency that knows nobody there, no allegiances other than, oversight. So I could talk about that all day.
Absolutely. And you will on the other show.
Yeah, and I do. And exactly.
As someone now, how long have you been doing this professionally now? How many years?
10 years.
In your 10 years,
Over 10 years, I think.
I'm sorry?
Over 10 years, I think. Yeah.
In that time frame, what do you wish you would have known from the very start and compared to what you know now? What would be the one thing that if you could go back in time and say, this thing will help get you through to here? What do you think it would be?
Having more realistic expectations about law and ethics and how they collide, and having more realistic expectations about our criminal justice system and just how much of a difference you can make as one person.
Yeah.
That I wish I knew, because, like I said, I had a best friend and a hero that was in law enforcement. And then I get into law enforcement and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people in this field that really have no business being here, and then some. So it was very jarring, very like shocking. And it changed a lot of my worldview. So I would say having more realistic expectations about what that will be like, what the prison industrial complex is, what you're likely going to see, and how much you're likely going to be able to change as one person alone. So I wish I knew that going in.
When you sit down with your clientele and have these conversations about where they've been and where they're potentially going, is it hard to communicate to them your knowledge? In other words, are they pretty set in who they are in their ways, or do you see on the whole more of a willingness to change and to grow?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think for me, it was a lot harder to establish some credibility with the clientele because, to them, I'm highly educated. I'm a woman. I'm white. I'm privileged. What do I know about the life that they have had to live? I get a lot of initial resistance right away, but they're very good because of the lives that they've lived, where they've come from. They're very good at distinguishing someone who's genuine and someone who's disingenuous, and they respond very well to boundaries, rules, and fairness. So if they see that I'm uniformly setting those boundaries, I'm being fair, if they see that, they see genuine, they see, okay, this person is somebody who might get it, who's listening to me, I can listen to her. And then they'll start to really engage. But there are some that just, they're very set in their ways. You're not going to see much of a difference. ingrained. And most of them are there for life. And even those who are there are some that are there for life who really are trying to change, if not for themselves, but to set an example for the younger incarcerated adults that come in, the younger generations. They're older, they've been there, they're seasoned, they're the quote OGs. They try to set a better example. They try to share their knowledge and give others a fighting chance. So it's a mixed bag, and it's really interesting to see and experience.
Mm-hmm. How did you adjust yourself emotionally, spiritually, maybe even, and to keep grounded through these experiences? I imagine in the beginning, especially, that had to have been in its own way traumatizing. How did you deal with all of that?
I had a lot of friends in the field, whether they're from grad school or from my work. They worked alongside me and we processed together. That's probably been the biggest saving grace, is having established strong colleague relationships where you can process these things with each other. We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. Some have been there longer, some of us not as long. But it's that support that really helps you to find ways to frame it, find ways to process it, find ways to not take it home with you. That was crucial in the beginning stages, is having those outlets.
Ironically, you felt more in danger in your career from people who are supposedly on the same side as you, meaning those who are on the prison guard / prison, the correction side versus the inmate side. Is that correct? That's
correct. I think that's something that shocks a lot of people. I've had more threatening situations and my, uncomfortable or harassing situations from people who are supposed to be working, cohesively with me than I had from the population that we're supposed to, quote, expect that from. When the reality was, I was much more respected by the population I was serving than the people I worked amongst. And that meant specifically a majority of the correctional officers, and including my chain of command in mental health, which consisted of mostly men, and one of whom used to be a police officer himself. So, yeah, I think that's something that shocks a lot of people when I tell them that it's not what they would expect.
Yeah, and there is a definite code of silence within that community as well, where if somebody does something, nobody talks about it because you get either more threats or you get moved to some other facility where you can deal with it all over again.
Right. And and even if they move you to a different facility, they already know about you before you get there. It's not it's a small community. As large as California is, this department is quite small. Everybody knows somebody at every institution, and it will follow you. And and they will go to great lengths if you breach that quote code of silence, as they call it. I've even had officers that I felt, who are one of the good ones, like the good apples out of the bunch. And some of them actually came to me to warn me of threats against me by their colleagues, which I appreciate. But then when it comes to like, okay, we need to do something about this, they won't speak up outside of telling me as a warning. They wouldn't take it where it needed to go either. They took it to me so I could deal with it, but then wouldn't corroborate what they had shared with me outside of our dialogue because of that fear.
It's so interesting to me too that people want to put on blinders about that or think, oh, that can't be. These people are supposed to protect and serve, and they're in there and they're supposed to be the good guys and all that. And my response to that is, look into your own family. Just look in the little unit of your own family. How many things are not talked about or covered up or looked the other way within siblings or parents or parent-child? Look at that. If it's happening with people that are supposedly ride or die family, blood bonded. Imagine what it's like out where there is not that.
Exactly. And this is like, we're talking about an institution that's run like its own society that is not within civilian life. Like it's completely detached from society, and it's extremely closed off. And when they go in there, it's their house. They run it. They have the rules. And the limited oversight to that allows them to get away and be emboldened to be that way. I mean, we saw it with the Stanford experiment with, look how that was, I think, the only, to my knowledge, I don't know if there's been another one since, but the only research study that had to stop because of the inhumane treatment. They had to end the study because people got way too into their roles and way too polarized in this research study that emulated what prison actually is. And if that doesn't tell you what goes on in there for real, I don't know what would.
Yeah, and for those listening, that experiment that took place took civilians in a psychology experiment to see what would happen if you assigned guard, let's say, to a certain group and then prisoner to another group. Again, these are just regular folks that have volunteered for the study, and how quickly it descended into violence against inmate, quote unquote, or aggression. It was such a crazy, so crazy.
They got so engrossed in that power role. And then it became this, like, we're a gang on this side, we're a gang on this side, it's us against them. And it became so inhumane that they had to, ethically end the experiment entirely. And that's pretty telling.
Yeah, I think people don't really understand what humans are capable of, or even what they themselves are capable of, given the right parameters.
Exactly. Power will change people, especially when that power is not regulated.
Do you find in your work that much of the population is generational?
How do you mean, like?
Meaning that it stays in the families, that if a parent is incarcerated, that the likelihood of their descendants would also be incarcerated?
There's definitely a correlation, for sure. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a cause, but it's certainly a correlation. I would say the majority of the individuals I've worked with have had parents or siblings that are incarcerated or were incarcerated. Some of them were even incarcerated with each other. That has happened. But there's also just a family history of, substance abuse or foster care or, things like that also played a role. But there's definitely a correlation. It's not uncommon to see that there's criminality like that runs transgenerationally.
And economics.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That plays a huge role. Access to care, classism, all of that falls into how recidivism occurs.
Access to bail money is a huge.
Oh yeah, it's a very classist system right there. If you don't have money to bail out, too bad. But hey, if you got money, bring it over. You can go free. It's very classist.
Let's talk about the rape kits. There's a huge backlog on the processing of rape kits. And you can go to endthebacklog.org to donate money to help with that, by the way, anyone listening. Your grandfather helped create this thing. Where is the legacy of this, do you think? How do we get the word out? How do we grow the program to make sure that people who have, and it's not just women, men get raped too, to have access to and girls and boys and non-gender specific, everybody. Unfortunately, this touches everyone. No pun intended, obviously, but where is the legacy of this, do you think? And just trying to get more, to get it into more hospitals, to make sure that more facilities can provide these things, to even get the police officers to understand how important it is.
So when my grandfather created the rape kit, it was debuted in the late 1970s. And then I think it became used throughout hospitals around 1980. There wasn't a national DNA database in place like CODIS. That wasn't in place until the 90s. So when he first created this, a lot of them were conducted, on survivors, but they were held in evidence lockers, because if they didn't have a suspect to test it against, then they couldn't use the DNA. There was nothing they could do. They couldn't test the kit and upload it into the national database with the hopes of finding a match. So back when it first became active and used until, mid to late 90s, it made sense why a backlog started. Because there was, if you don't know the suspect, if you don't know who to test it against, then why open it at all? Why tamper with it at all? So that I understood. But once we got the national DNA database in place and states started requiring DNA being uploaded into that system for anybody that was charged with a felony, and we started to get more of a robust collection of DNA, it didn't make sense why any untested kits stayed untested. So that's how it started. Why it continues now is for a number of different reasons. Firstly, like with hospitals. So in order to conduct a rape kit or a forensic exam, a person who's doing the exam has to be certified. So you have to have like additional training. So that's money and time that somebody has to do in order to get this certification so that they are capable of doing these kits. As a result, there's not a lot of we call them SANE, I can't remember, sexual assault nurse evidence. I can't remember the actual acronym for that. We'll have to look it up. It's eluding me right now. But you can be a doctor or a nurse to get this SANE certification. But we're looking at like 40 hours of training and money and time away from work. And so as a result, a lot of hospitals don't have a SANE certified individual working in their hospital. And if they do, they're not working on every single shift. So when survivors are going to a hospital to get a rape kit examination done and or attend to any injuries that may have resulted, they get turned away a lot of times because they don't have a certified individual on staff to do the kit. And then that leaves the person with a few choices. One, I either stay without showering, without changing, sitting in this as my body being the crime scene until I can find someone who will do it. Or I just say, screw it. I want relief and I want to shower and bathe and put this behind me. That's where we're left. And then those who really, really bravely and courageously power through until they can give that DNA, only to have that kit sit on a shelf, is the absolutely most infuriating thing that I could ever imagine. I didn't realize how bad the backlog was until about 2015. CNN reached out to me and I did an interview. They told me about it and what was being just how bad it was. And that's when I learned the gravity of it. I knew it existed, but not to the degree that it does. I had no idea. So after that, I made it a mission to start bringing awareness to this. I know my papa did not create this kit so that it can sit on shelves or not be used. And he certainly didn't create this kit so that we could continue not prioritizing crimes against women the way that they should be. Oh, and men and children, sexual crimes in nature. So since then, I had written a book about him. It's called The Power of Truth, The Life of Louis Arvatul and the Legacy of the Rape Kit. And I donate proceeds from those sales to endthebacklog.org. because there's just no excuse anymore. There's absolutely no excuse for this backlog to continue. It's infuriating. And so and to answer the question about the legacy, I feel like as a direct legacy of him, I feel very empowered to keep my voice active in this, become an active voice in this, and do my part to try and bring awareness to this and find legislation or whatever it is we've got to do to make this go away. This can't continue anymore.
Yeah, it's the idea that a hospital charges $200 for a Q-tip and can't find the finances to, and that's not hyperbole. I've had surgery. I know how much Q-tip in a hospital costs. It's a lot. And the fact that they can't find the finances to ensure the safety and justice for people that have had these crimes committed against them is just mind-boggling. Except for it's not, because it so speaks to
our society
and system, and also when you think rape, of course, the first thing one thinks of is women and girls. But of course, it's sexual abuse happens across the board to all types of people, and all genders and all that. But it does, I think, speak to where women fall in society on the range of
priority,
how they are helped in not only within the realm of victim and survivor, but also in the medical field. And how women are treated within hospitals and doctors' offices.
Yeah. We're quite often dismissed.
Yes.
Or our complaints are minimized. They're labeled or pathologized as anxiousness or something other than what it really is. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a across the board problem.
They don't even get the kind of painkiller situation that males get.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. Like IUDs or,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's mind-boggling. One of the things I've been trying to introduce is legislation that mandates that every state, any hospital has to have a SANE certified employee working every shift, and that be a requirement by state law so that no one is turned away. I don't know how or why that isn't the case. I know that it's not easy to be SANE certified. To be certified to conduct these kits it's a trauma in itself, right? To have the fact that we need to do this, the fact that we have to learn to do this, the fact that this exists. It's very grueling emotionally for anybody who is certified to do this, because a survivor's body is the crime scene. It's grueling for them. It's grueling for the individual who has to take all the caution in the world to make sure that kid is collected appropriately and compartmentalized and tamper-free and no cross-contamination and preserved with its integrity. And so there's very few SANE certified individuals as a result. So I feel like if state laws would mandate that, then hospitals can incentivize the training. We're paying for it if you go because we need it. And so more people would be able or willing to get SANE certified. And that way, at every shift, whenever a survivor shows up in the worst day of their life, is not turned away.
Amen to that. Yeah. I'm glad you're doing that work. And if anyone listening wants to help with that, do you have any kind of a thing people can reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me through my social media. My TikTok is Dr. Engels. My Instagram is Dr. Tristin Engels. I have petitions in my links that you can sign. Some of that, I have several. One of them are like post fitness for duty evaluations for peace officers continuously throughout their careers. I mean, there's all kinds of things that I'm trying to help generate change for, but I'm only one person. And I'm actually trying to explore nonprofit ideas as well. I'm an advocate.
Well, I'll put links, as I always do, on Hey Human Podcast links page too, so that people can find it easily.
Thank you.
Have you been in the presence of a true psychopath before?
Oh yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
I say that and laugh, but that was a humor as a defense mechanism. Yes.
No, I get it. I laugh when I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. I absolutely have. Yeah, I don't know what really I can say because
You don't have to give names, but I am curious. The feeling that I just would love to hear. Like, could you give an example of what that experience was like without giving names, obviously?
Yeah. The experience of being in the presence of a true psychopath. When you encounter one, you feel it in your gut. It's like all of your nerve endings are just on fire of like, okay, this feels predatory. This feels unsafe. Your spidey senses are up. That's the sensation I get when I'm in the presence of a true psychopath. And that's happened. I've had several occasions where that has happened. Yeah.
Do you think psychopaths are made or born or both?
I think there's varying research on this, right? So we've got psychopathy. They've done a lot of brain scans on psychopaths that are like diagnostic psychopaths, where there are structural abnormalities in the brain, which suggests that there are some nature or biological aspects to it. And then there's sociopath, which you've heard that term, which is more of the made version of things. So yeah, I think there's both. I think you've got those that are born with some abnormalities, lacking that conscious, just born that way. And then there are those that I believe had been made through their environment. And those you'll see, they'll have some level of regret or remorse in certain areas, but it's quite minimal and it still always has to do with them. It's very self egocentric. So yeah, I guess the short answer is both.
So it's interesting if having a body reaction to a psychopath. Somebody like a Ted Bundy who was able to work his way, getting people to do his bidding, and sort of the wounded animal trope that he used. How is it that you think that these types of people are able to pull the wool over? Is it just by mirroring? Yeah.
Yeah, it's by mirroring, like the mask of sanity. I was actually in a documentary on Tubi about Ted Bundy called Evil Among Us, Ted Bundy. So you guys can check that out. But Ted Bundy, he really stood out to me because of the time in which he was active, that he was so underestimated because he was a white, affluent, educated male, that the community, the people around him, just didn't look at the red flags. They didn't even want to trust or believe that this person who's educated and so like charming and handsome could possibly be this monster. And it was like I think he was really the one person that shook people's ideas of what a true monster could or couldn't look like. He masked it that well. He knew exactly how to hide behind that.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary case. I've read a lot about him, and when you're reading it in retrospect, you think, I mean, come on, but to your point, people can get away with a whole lot if they look a certain way or speak a certain way or
hanging out in like more affluent areas like ski resorts and and back then people really didn't consider that. Just like even now, there's a lot of systemic racism, right? White people are not, especially in the criminal justice system, are not being viewed equally to BIPOC individuals. Well, back then, when Ted Bundy was active, no one was going to look at him and say, yep, I see it. No, they were going to look at people of color, Black.
Which is fascinating because in history, there have been so few people of color who have committed serial killing. It's mostly white males.
Yeah, white men.
It's like this exclusive club of white men, and yet there's still this.
Yep, that's our society. Our society is very racist and classist and patriarchal. And so if you're there's no way. I mean, we need to be looking at, minorities. We need to be looking at people who are lower in the socioeconomic status than us, because those are the problem, right? That's how we're brought up to a lot. Many people have been brought up to believe those bad neighborhoods don't go to, but what's bad about it? It's a poor neighborhood. Like that, but they equate that with bad. And so, it's just back then, I think that's such a great case study for just the sociological aspects that he really brought to light, Ted Bundy.
I'm from Washington State. Lots and lots of serial killers, a lot of woods, I guess.
a lot of good hiding spots, as we say.
And also truck routes,
truck routes. Yep. Yeah. Like the Long Island serial killer all along the truck route.
Who still hasn't been found. The Garden State killer. Yeah. I interviewed a guy that wrote a book about that, Christian Barth. Yeah. Still to this day, although there are speculations that it might have been two serial killers that were already active that decided to come together to have a little fun. Some interesting theories around that. It's a good book.
If I had to guess, I would have said, truck driving would be an easy answer, but I also feel like any kind of highway patrol officer, because no one's going to question him pulled over on the side of the road with a car just hanging out there while he buries the body. Like that was where my mind went, sadly, but it's a reality.
I mean, I think I'm never surprised when we find out somebody who's perpetrated crimes against children is a coach or a teacher or a clergy, or, you're drawn to wherever your psychopathy.
Where it gives you access to your prey. And then they take on roles that make it easy for them to groom their prey, Yeah, it's all opportunity.
Would you say let me preface this. Whenever I talk to my dad, who I adore, he's always so afraid. If I say I'm going on a road trip or I'm going to go to this place or do that, he's always like, well, be careful. Keep your head on this. He's so worried.
Yeah.
Would you say that because of what you do for a living, have you grown more so accustomed to the experience and knowing the things that it's made you kind of have a bubble like I'll probably be fine statistically, or does it make you more hyper aware?
More hyper aware. It's interesting because when you're around the population that I serve and you see the details of their crimes and the patterns of their crimes and like what they're looking for when they're looking to victimize, right? You learn those things and then you take those into account and avoid them in your own life. Like you won't catch me walking with headphones in or talking on the phone. I won't, because anything that takes my senses away from my environment makes me a mark. Wearing your hair up makes it easier for them to pull your hair. Or if it's like in a ponytail, if it's down, you have to like cover it with a cap or something, like things like that. Always checking the back seats. One of the inmates that I had on my caseload, he was older and he was trying to make amends for his life. And part of his way in doing that was telling me ways that he victimized and what I should not do when I'm out in the world. Check your back seat. Don't do that. Don't do this. And it's eye-opening because you hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Like, this is what I looked for. I wasn't stalking one particular person. It's a crime of opportunity. That one's the easiest mark. I'm going for it. So yeah, it made me much more hyper aware. And to some people that might seem like a negative. And it can be if I'm too startled in my environment or too worried to leave the house. But in reality, I think it strengthened my situational awareness and my sense of safety, and challenged any false sense of safety I might have had. So
I think it's so funny that people tease women are obsessed with true crime, and my response to that is, Well, of course, because we're statistically more likely to be victimized. And not only that, we're learning what not to do actively by hearing other people's stories. I have changed so many habits based on hearing what other people have gone through. For example, at night when I would get in my car, I would sit and answer emails or texts before I would drive away. Don't do that anymore. I would never sit in my car for a period of time, especially after going to a bar or going to a restaurant or something like that. You have to, like you said, the whole being aware of your surroundings is I'm quite tall. So I think I'm already a little less exciting. I shouldn't say that and challenge anyone listening. That might,
right. This is
show you.
Not an invitation.
Not an invitation, but I do think it certainly helps. To your point, there is not a need to be absolutely terrified every time you walk out the door. That's not healthy. But certainly having a sense of self and surrounding is so good. Look at the society we live in. We get into strangers' cars all the time now.
Yeah, I know that it took me a very long time to do an Uber or Lyft. The idea of that made me so uneasy. When Facebook started doing the check-ins, like checking into here, and it gave you literally the latitude and longitude of where you are, I was like, why are you all doing this? Who needs to know where you are at this very moment? Those things blew my mind. But yeah, just as you said, you're right. As a woman, our main natural predator is man. I don't go out into the world thinking another woman is going to prey upon me. It's man. So, and even like you said, your dad, even to this day, is still like, be safe. We're raised to fear other men for a reason.
And I hate that that's the case. And I know men will respond to that by saying not all men. And you're right. It isn't all men. However, it only takes one. And the truth of the matter is it's easy to be cavalier or flippant about the situation, but it is a reality. If you ask nearly every one of and I'm just going to go with gender female because it's, whom I've had the pleasure of having this conversation, unfortunately, that at what age did you start being touched, accosted, leered at, whatever it is, by men? Mm-hmm. And we're talking 4, 5, 6-year-olds. Yeah. And I remember when the Me Too movement, and I'm veering off topic from the topic of you, but I just think it's
that's okay. This is great.
People to hear is that when the Me Too movement first started, one of the things was, I remember seeing on Twitter, someone had said, write down everything you can remember of any kind of interaction that was whatever it was that made you uncomfortable or feel unsafe or was improper touching, any of that. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And I wrote down 3 pages later. And later that afternoon, I was talking to my dad and I told him about that experiment. And he said, well, you probably don't have very much. And he said, if anything, thinking that he's, he takes it on himself. Like, I protected you your whole life. And I said, 3 pages, Dad. And I started going down. He was so astounded for everything from being at the water park at 8 and having someone stick a toe where it didn't belong, or, in the wave pool, or something that happened in college, or, whatever it is the reality is it's all the time. And we have to be so careful, unfortunately, and aware.
Yeah. And it isn't all men, but it is all men in a sense that, like, where were why didn't any other man seeing these things intervene? Right? If you see it, intervene. There's a reason I don't go jogging outside anymore. I used to get trailed by men in cars. It's like a terrifying experience. There's someone in a car, I'm on foot, and they are trailing me and catcalling me. At any moment, they could jump out and kidnap me. And all these other cars are passing by and not one person stops. Right? So it's like, we really, truly only feel safe with ourselves in those moments because no one intervenes.
I had such a I think I've talked about this once before on this show, but I was doing a writers group with, I believe there were 4 women, 1 man, and we were all sitting around the table, we were writing, but at this very moment we were chatting amongst each other, and it was starting to get nightfall. We were sitting outside and there was a crunch of a leaf nearby. And all the women immediately stopped talking and turned to look at it. And the man just kept talking. He hadn't even heard it or realized it, but all the women immediately heard this sort of far off crackle in the bushes.
Oh, again, yeah.
We're always on this, at some part of our being is on this high alert. At least I hope that's the case. And again, it's not about telling people to be afraid. It's telling people to be empowered.
Yeah, exactly. Like I go to Pilates, we discussed. I can walk to it and I choose to walk to it. I don't listen to music. I'm not on my phone. I'm aware, but often I'm walking behind another woman who's just happens to be walking about. Sometimes they have headphones in, sometimes they don't. But even I understand that I'm behind them. They don't know who I am. They don't know I'm a woman. They don't know anything. So I alert them. Hey, I'm just letting you know I'm behind you so I don't startle you. I don't know how many times I've had to do that in the past few weeks. And every woman will jolt and be like, oh my gosh. And then they'll thank me for announcing myself and letting them know this is our reality. This is an everyday occurrence for us.
Yeah. And I do that as well, actually, because most people are on their headphones.
Yeah.
They generally have one
in their phone, or they're just not paying attention.
Yeah. And also we need to acknowledge the fact, unfortunately, I read a lot of very disturbing things and as far as statistics and articles about all this kind of stuff, just because of my work and people I interview. But it's not just women can also be used in human trafficking as a way to pull people away. So just again, to your point, if your spidey sense is tingling, pay attention. Generally, first instincts are the right instincts.
Exactly. Always trust your instinct. Even if you're wrong, you're at least safe. Like that's how I see it. If I'm wrong, sorry, but at least I'm safe. Nothing happened to me. I trusted it. I took care of myself.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
and I think normally if somebody isn't out to be a really, a predator, if you say to them, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to offend you, but they'd be like, oh my gosh, no, totally get it.
Yeah, I get it. Exactly. They're not going to get on the defense or personalize or gaslight you.
Yeah, but if they do, that's also a red flag.
A red flag, right. Again, just listen to your gut. Your gut exists for a reason, and we've honed it all our lives for a reason. So yeah,
absolutely. So what's coming for you? You're still working to make these changes in our system.
Yeah.
Is that mostly your main work?
Yeah, I mean, I still do government work. I'm looking into starting a nonprofit to help address a lot of these issues that we discussed and making these changes and helping survivors, because it's sad that we need to do that and it's not being done. I am in another documentary. It came out on the Golden State Killer on Tubi. So that came out. I have a few more potential television things in the works. Yeah, I'm just going to keep the legacy going, honor a great man and everybody that he's touched.
Yeah. And what a legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. He was great. And the fact that he never really talked about the rape kit very often. And when he did, it was only when I was old enough to really get it. He didn't like the fact that it had to be done.
Of course not.
Like, why are we here?
Yeah, of course not.
And he lectured. He was a part of women's advocacy groups. And yeah, so I just want to continue to be a voice. I think like you said, my history, my family connections my voice can be amplified a lot more than others. And so I want to use that for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he's extraordinarily proud of you.
I hope so. I think he is too. I'm hoping to adapt his book into something, a documentary or something, to draw more awareness to this. But we'll see. Hopefully, anyone listening is any interest, let me know.
I have interest.
I know, right? Let's bring it to the big screen.
Let's do it. Or a series. I think it would make an extraordinary series.
Yeah, same. I agree too.
Yeah.
We'll see. Fingers crossed.
Well, thank you for doing all the work and for your insight as well. I am fascinated by the mind and what makes people do what they do. But I'm also happy that people like you exist that see the brokenness of our facilities that incarcerate humans on such a disturbing rate.
Yeah. It's very disturbing, and to see it firsthand, it's that much it's that much more jarring. But I'm grateful for that experience, as scary and life-threatening as it might have been with the green wall. I'm grateful because it taught me so much, and I can speak about these things openly and talk about the changes that we need to see in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. One more time for everyone, how to find you.
So on TikTok, it's Dr. Engels, and that's DRENGELS. On Instagram, it's Dr. Tristin Engels, and you can spell it, but TRISTINENGELS. Those are my two social medias that I use.
Your TikTok seems to be one that you do a lot.
Yeah, that's the one that has the most following and reaches the most people. But I am on Twitter. I'm just learning it still.
Well, again, I'll put all those links on Hey Human Podcast links page too, just to make life easier, as well as your book, link to your book.
Please. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.